Hi, I'm Kelly Colleen. Welcome to my art class. Let's get creating.
Guess what our project's going to be today? We're doing fall leaves. Alright, as usual, I want you to start with a warm-up. So before we do our drawing lesson, I kind of think it's fun to compare what you've learned after the drawing lesson to what you knew before the drawing lesson. Plus, the warm-up is a great way to get your mind flowing and your hands warmed up. So, I want you to go ahead and pause the video for a few minutes and draw as many different kinds of leaves as you can think of. Go. Oh, and don't forget to unpause the video when you're done. Alright, so now that you've done your warm-ups, you can go ahead and set those aside and get a fresh piece of paper. All you're going to need for this part of the project is a pencil and an eraser and your paper. Now, I'm probably going to tell you more than you ever wanted to know about leaves, but I think it helps us to be better artists when we can understand the thing that we're drawing. So, first of all, I want to go over a little bit of leaf anatomy. It's actually going to help us be better artists. I'm going to use one of these simple leaves that I found in my yard, and I'm going to use this as an example to teach us a little bit about the anatomy of a leaf. So, what we have here is a single leaf. You can see that it has a central vein going through the middle. That central vein is called the midrib. So, I'm actually going to start by drawing my midrib. That will help me get my leaf to be as symmetrical as I can, having that balanced line in the middle. So I have my midrib, and then this is a very simple leaf. It's a little lumpy just because it's all dried up, but before it was all dried up, it had a nice tip at the top, and it made kind of this oval shape, and then had another tip at the other side. And so this is kind of the basic shape of the leaf that we're looking at. And every leaf has a little stem that comes out the back. This is the part that will connect the leaf to the branch. This is all the stuff that we already know, right? This little stem is called a petiole, funny word. And at the base of a simple leaf, you will almost always have a bud. They could call it an axillary bud, but I'm just going to call it a bud to keep it simple. The bud is where the flowers grow in the spring. The bud is what also produces fruit on fruit trees. So every leaf will have some kind of bud at its base. Now, I mentioned that this middle line is the midrib. This outer edge also has a name. It is called the margin. And all the little veins that come off of the midrib are just called veins. You could call them secondary veins. Some people call the midrib the primary vein, and the little veins the secondary veins. But for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to call this a vein. And they run throughout the whole leaf. And then this whole flat surface here is called the blade. A simple leaf, like this one, has a single blade connected to a petiole, connected to a bud. Now, it does get more complicated than this, and I won't go over it too much. I'm just going to show you the difference between a simple leaf and a compound leaf. The main difference here is that instead of having a single leaf connected to a bud, on a compound leaf, you actually have multiple leaflets connected to a bud. So I'm going to start with my little bud here, and then I'm going to draw a petiole. However, this petiole is going to be longer, and off of this petiole will be multiple smaller leaves called leaflets. So I'm going to go ahead and put a leaf right here at the tip, and then I'm just going to keep it simple and draw 2 more leaves off the sides, off of each side I should say. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Now each of these individual leaves, you might want to call them a leaf, but believe it or not, these little leaves are not their own leaf. They're called leaflets. And all of these leaves together believe it or not, make up one single leaf. That sounds a little crazy, but the reason that all these leaves make up one leaf is because they're all connected to one bud and one petiole. That's why this is called a compound leaf, because it has lots of leaves for one little bud. That's the difference between a simple leaf and a compound leaf. Of course, each of these mini leaflets can have the same characteristics as a normal leaf. They can have veins, they can have a margin, which is the outside edge, they can have a midrib, and these are each individual blades. So a compound leaf can be made of multiple blades, all connected to one petiole and one bud. Now that you understand the difference between a compound leaf and a simple leaf, we're going to show you a bunch of different awesome fall leaves, and you can see all these different parts as we go through it. Now that I've shown you the difference between a simple leaf and a compound leaf, that will help you understand some of the things we're about to learn next. Now there are a few other details I want to go over in this extra space over here that will help us understand just a little bit more about leaves before we draw our leaves. One thing I want you to understand is the difference between the word pinit, parallel, and palmate or palmate. Pinit is when you have a leaf that looks kind of like this one over here. See how all the little veins poke out from the main stem? That is called pinit. We're going to be learning about other leaves that are pinit, like this. In fact, we're not going to learn about pine trees or anything in this video. This is more fall leaves. But when you talk about pine trees, this is going to be important. Parallel is for kind of like longer leaves, maybe like the leaves you would see on a tulip. Their veins go long ways down the length of the leaf. So those are parallel. We're not really going to do many of those today, but palmate we will do. Palmate comes from the word palm. Think of your hand. On the hand, I've got, my central palm, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 4 fingers and a thumb, all radiating from that central palm. So the same idea applies here in palmate or palmate. You have your central vein, but your other veins separate from that main vein kind of at the base. And they create almost like a star shape, all coming off of that one point. So a palmate leaf might have different pieces that poke out, stemming from that central piece. Okay, I've just turned it into 2 different types of leaf here, but you get the idea. But the main idea is that the veins all stem kind of from this central point here at the bottom. That is a palmate leaf, and you can have palmate clusters of leaves that I'll show you a little bit later. There are just a couple other things I want you to understand. For example, in this compound leaf, I have drawn the leaves exactly opposite from each other. There's a special name for that. That is called opposite. So opposite leaves, they do just that. They grow exactly opposite from each other on a twig or a branch. If you have one at the tip like this, then it is oddly opposite. When you have leaves that are not directly opposite, but maybe go back and forth like this, or stem into other stems like this, that is called alternate, because they alternate on this stem. So alternate could look like that. It could also just look like this, back and forth, back and forth. So we have opposite. If it has just one, it's odd. It could have 2 at the end, and that would make it even. We have alternate where they go back and forth. So those are just a few things I want you to understand. One last thing is the edge here. We have a smooth edge on this example leaf, but some leaves come with toothed edges or serrated edges. Some leaves come with lobed edges. A lobe is kind of like when you have wobbles or pieces that poke out like this. Those are lobes. Lobe. This is like serrated because it has little teeth. And there are other types, but those are the main ones I want you to understand for what we're doing today. So there's our lesson on leaf anatomy. And now we're going to get more into the fun stuff, which is drawing actual leaves. I'm going to show you some basic leaf shapes that exist in the real world using some of the real trees that create beautiful fall foliage every year. So the first kind of leaf we're going to learn how to draw is a red oak leaf. There are a lot of types of oak leaves, but the red oak leaf is pretty typical. And then there's also a white oak leaf. There are a lot of types of white oaks as well, but this is a simple example of what a white oak leaf looks like. Now, right off the bat, you can already tell some differences between the red oak leaf and the white oak leaf. First of all, red oak leaves have pointed edges, and white oak leaves have rounded edges. So I'm going to remove the white oak leaf for now, and first we'll draw our red oak leaf. As I mentioned before, it always helps me to start with my midrib, or my primary central vein. So I'm going to draw that first because it will help me keep things somewhat symmetrical. So here's my line for my midrib. Now if you'll notice on this leaf, we have a main point at the top, and then we have some other veins pointing off to the sides. Remember in our previous thing we learned about Pinit veins, veins that all come off of one central vein. And that is the type of vein that we have here, a Pinit vein. So we've got our central line, and then we have veins coming off of our central midrib. But there's another thing I want you to notice about this leaf, and that is the shape. Notice how at the bottom of the leaf, it's a little skinnier, and then at the top of the leaf, it gets rounder and wider. If I were to draw an outline around this, just so you get an idea, it gets bigger at the top, kind of like a balloon, and smaller at the bottom. And if I pull that away, you can't see it very well because I didn't draw it very dark. It makes kind of like a balloon shape. So if I put that back in there, see how that fits nicely into that balloon shape? So one thing that can help me when I'm drawing my red oak leaf is to maybe start by lightly drawing a big balloon shape. So I'm going to start smaller at the bottom and get bigger around the top, and then get small again at the bottom. Here's my nice big balloon shape. If you have a little hand, you could use your hand to measure how tall to do it, and you could use maybe 3 or 4 fingers to measure how far across you want to make it. For me, it looks like it's about 3 fingers and almost the height of my whole hand. Now, after I have my nice big balloon shape, you can always pause if I'm going too fast. I'm going to go ahead and add a few of my Pinit veins off the sides. I don't need too many. I'm looking at some pictures of these leaves on the internet, and they have a differing number of points. Most of the ones I look at have about 3 points on each side, and then a point on top. In fact, this example here has 3 points on the left side, and 3, oh look, a 4th little point on the right side, and then a point on top. So, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go about 3 fingers down, and in all the pictures I'm looking at, the vein sort of curves outward like this. Makes a little curve. So I'm going to make a slight curve and give myself 1 little point off this leaf. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, a slight curve and another point. I want to make sure I have a good space between the first midrib vein and then the next vein. And then the same thing, I want to make sure I have another good amount of space between the next one. So I'm going to use my 3 fingers as a measurer. And then I'm going to come down maybe 2 fingers this time. And I'm going to curve out and make another Pinit vein on each side, going almost all the way to the edge of my balloon shape. Then I'm going to do that one last time. I'm going to make a small, this one's close to the bottom, and it's going to go close to the edge of my balloon shape, just like that. Now after I have drawn each of my Pinit veins, I no longer need my balloon shape. The balloon shape was just to help me know how big to make them. So I can go ahead and erase my balloon shape because I don't really need it anymore. That was just a little guide to help me. I tried to draw it a little bit lighter so it would be easy to erase when I was done. Now that we have the vein or the skeleton of our leaf, we get to add some of the details that are going to make it look more like a leaf. Now, one thing I did not mention on my last drawing is what we call a lobe. I kind of mentioned a lobe. I mentioned how we had these wavy things, and every time it pokes out, that's called a lobe. Same with this leaf. Every time it pokes out, this is a lobe. This is a lobe. This is a lobe. Every time it pokes in like this, it's called a sinus. Kind of like the sinuses in your nose. A sinus is like a cavity or an opening or a little hole. So a lobe and a sinus. A lobe and a sinus. A lobe and a sinus. So that means each of these lines on our leaf is pointing to a lobe. And that means that somewhere in the spaces between these lobes, we're going to be drawing our sinuses. But I want you to notice how on this lobe, there is more than one point. So at the tip top, I have actually 3 little points. And then from there, I have another 2 points on this side and 1 point on this side. But they don't come all the way to the edge of my balloon. They actually go in a little more. So I'm going to come back to this leaf. I can still kind of see the outline where my balloon was, but I'm going to draw these lobes, and I don't want them to go all the way out. I want them to be shorter. So I'm going to come in here and draw my 2 little lobes, but see how they're shorter? They don't come out as far. Here's where my balloon used to be. This one stops before it gets to the edge of my balloon. This is going to be my little lobe next to my big lobe. Now, if you want to do the same thing on your other secondary veins or lobes, that can help you figure out where you want to put each of these extra little points. So this point and this point, they have a little vein that's going to connect to this secondary vein. So what I'm going to do is come up here. Now, they do not go all the way to the edge of the balloon, right? They come in shorter. So I'm going to come back to this vein and make 2 short little lobes, like this. And I'm going to do that at the end of all of mine, but I don't want them to be as long as this. They have to be shorter. Short, short. I'm going to do it down here. Short, short. I'm going to do it over here. Short, short. And I might even do little short ones down here. Short, short. So now all my veins have these short little secondary veins poking out. If I want to, I could add a few more. See how this has 1 point on this side, 1 point on that side, and then it has 1, 2 more points before it hits the sinus. Same thing over here. 1 point on this side, the middle point, 1 point on this side, and then 1, 2 more points before it hits the sinus. So what I could do is go in and add 2 more points. 1, 2. Off of this stem, because after it goes this, it's going to go bump, bump before it hits its little sinus and turns into the next leaf. So I'm going to do the same thing on this one. 1, 2, and I might do it here too. 1, 2, and over here. 1, 2. See how when I make these ones, they almost form a line going into the leaf. I don't want them to come all the way out to my balloon because see how this point, it doesn't touch the edge of the balloon, and neither does this one. In fact, they're getting closer and closer to the inside of my leaf. So when you make these ones, you want them to get closer and closer to the inside. Now, there's a reason why we're making our skeleton before we do the outside of our leaf, because if we have a really good skeleton of a leaf, that's going to make our outside look really good. So now that I've done all of that, and you know, if you want to add this 4th lobe, 1, 2, 3, 4, you could just poke it right off the side right there at the bottom. That's totally fine, but it's up to you. I also forgot to add my 2 little ones right there. So now that I have this interesting looking skeleton, it almost looks like a tree, right? I'm going to go to the tip top and start adding my margin. Remember what a margin is? On our paper, the margin is the outside edge of our leaf. So I'm going to go ahead and add this interesting margin. But there's one last thing I need to remember, and that is all of these little sinuses, the little holes that come all the way into the middle. So, without forgetting my sinuses, I'm going to take my first point, connect it to my second point, and connect those to my third point. But every time I connect them, I want it to bend inward and then connect, inward and then connect, like a U shape. It's that U shape that's going to make this feel more like the red oak leaf that it is. Now I'm not going to connect this one to this one yet. I'm actually just going to do each of my main lobes, my main tips. So I'm going to go to this tip and connect it with a U shape and a U shape. I'm going to connect this one with a U shape and a U shape. I'm going to connect all my tips with those curved U shapes. And then I'm going to stop there. This looks pretty silly so far. It doesn't really look like a leaf yet, and that's okay. We're going to get to that. Now, I have this big lobe and this big lobe. I'm looking at this big lobe and this big lobe. Notice how in between the lobes there's a large sinus or a large hole or cavity. So when I connect these two lobes together, I'm going to make a really deep U shape, a big sinus, a big hole, and connect them like that. See how I made a big U shape? I almost came all the way back to my center midrib. Almost, but not quite. There's like maybe a pinky width in there. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to go to the edge of my last tip from my lobe. I'm going to come down almost all the way to my midrib and then connect it back to that point, the other point of the next leaf. This is going to start giving me the shape that I want for my red oak leaf. Now before I connect these two big ones, we have to connect it to these smaller ones first. So I'm going to go to the edge of my lobe here. And I'm going to make that little U shape and connect it to the first point. And another U shape and connect it to the second point. Now I'm ready to connect this little point to this point over here. But I need to make a big sinus. So I'm going to come almost all the way back to my midrib and then bring it back out till it reaches that. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I'm going to go to the last tip where I left off and make a U shape to that vein lobe and a U shape to the next vein lobe. I have no more vein lobes left. That means I'm going to make my big sinus shape. So I'm going to go from my last remaining lobe to my next lobe. And I'm going to bring it all the way close, almost touching my midrib, the center of my vein, and bring it back up to that point. Starting to look pretty good so far. And you know what? If you get too skinny, it's actually okay, because there's a leaf out there called the pin oak leaf. And the pin oak leaf has really skinny lobes. So if you get too skinny, you're just making a pin oak leaf, and that's okay. So we have these two little side ones we want to connect to. So I'm going to make my U shape and connect one, my U shape and connect another, kind of like an umbrella, and I'm going to do it on the other side. U shape to connect one, U shape to connect another. Now I don't have any others left, so that means I'm going to jump straight from this one to this one, but what do I have here that I need to remember? A large sinus. So I'm going to go almost to the midrib and back to my lobe. Same thing over here. Almost to the midrib and back to the lobe. My leaf almost looks like a Batman leaf. That's okay. Now at the very end I have this one little lobe left. I'm going to make a sinus and connect those two together. And then bring it back to my base. If you want to add one more little sinus down here, just like the other side, you could. And back to the base. Now I've got the skeleton for my red oak leaf, and I've got my actual red oak leaf. There are some little veins that go to the sinuses, so if you want to add a few veins that go to your sinuses, you could. And then, of course, we can't forget the stem, where it connects to the tree. And that's it. That's our whole oak leaf. If you think that your vein lines are a little too dark, you could try to lighten them just a little bit with your eraser so they don't look quite so dark. Because sometimes, if they're too dark, it's hard to tell what we're looking at. So I'm going to very lightly go back. I'm not erasing them all the way, just a little bit, so that they're not so dark. So they look more like almost invisible veins in the middle of my red oak leaf. So I've only lightly erased them. Now, does my red oak leaf look exactly like this one? No, it doesn't. And that's okay, because every red oak leaf is a little bit different. With your parents' help, you could go look online and you could see different types of oak leaves that look kind of similar to this, but kind of different. And you'll probably get some new ideas on how to make an oak leaf. But this is just one way you can do it. So we're going to move this red oak leaf out of the way, and we're going to look at our white oak leaf. Take a look at the shape of this white oak leaf. He's kind of wrinkly. He's a little smaller than the red oak leaf, but he has a similar balloon type shape. So I'm going to make it a little smaller, but notice if I go around and almost touch all of the tips of this oak leaf, it's still making a balloon shape. It's wider at the top and skinnier at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and erase the other balloon because we don't really need it. So on this side we're going to be making a white oak leaf. And remember, the main difference between the red oak leaf and the white oak leaf is that the red oak leaf has pointy ends and the white oak leaf has rounded ends or lobes. So we're going to take a look at this leaf here, and we're going to start with a very similar approach that we took to the red oak leaf. We're going to start with the midrib, going from top to bottom, so we can try to get everything as symmetrical as possible. Then if we count the number of lobes on this leaf, we have one at the top, but then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and a baby on one side. 1, 2, 3, 4, and a baby on this side. So there are about 5 lobes on each side of our example. And if I look at my pictures on the internet, 1, 2, 3, 4, I'm counting about 5 or 6, anywhere from 4 to 5 lobes on each oak leaf. Now, in all the pictures I see, they're definitely bigger at the top and smaller at the bottom. So we're going to follow that pattern in our video here. So now what I'm going to do, we have our 5 lobes on each side, and each of those lobes is connecting to our central stem, the midrib. So I'm going to try to space out 5 different lobes along this side here. The first lobe is at the top. The next lobe I'm going to bring it over so it's not quite the biggest one, but kind of in the middle. And I'm going to draw a nice diagonal line back to my midrib. Then I'm going to come here at the widest part and do the same thing. Remember, these are all pinit when they all come from the central midrib. Then I'm going to come and try to measure a somewhat equal amount of space between them. And draw another one here. And then these last ones are going to get kind of close together because they're small. I'm going to have a baby one right here. So I'm going to try to do the same thing on the other side and keep it as equal as possible. So this one, I'm going to try to measure, almost like go straight across, and wherever it touches the edge of my balloon, that's where I'm going to do my rib, my vein. I'm going to bring it down. Same here. I'm going to try to match it on the other side. Bring it down to meet it at the same spot. Then I'm going to try to match this one on the other side. Bring it down to meet the vein in the middle. Try to match this one. Bring it to the middle, and this little one. So in the end, I have this interesting looking leaf. Now all I have to do is connect each of my lobes, but I'm going to be creating sinuses in between them. Now my top lobes and sinuses are actually kind of close together. In fact, I'm going to make one more small vein on each side because I want them to be kind of close together. So I'm going to come here to the tip top. I'm going to make a little teeny sinus and a little bump and go back to the next one. So it's a nice curvy shape. So I'm making little bumps around each lobe. And these are rounded, remember? Rounded bumps. So there's a bump to here. Now this bump's going to get a little bigger. This sinus is going to get a little bigger. And then back out. Remember, I'm keeping my pencil really smooth so they're curved shapes. Then this next one's going to get even bigger, so I'm going to make a bigger sinus and go back out to my lobe. See how it's nice and curved? There's no points. Everything is very smooth. Then I'm going to go make another big sinus back to my lobe. These sinuses, I'm not bringing them as close to the middle as I did on this one. And I'm doing that on purpose because these oak leaves, their sinuses don't need to come all the way to the middle. They're actually not too big. They're really only like 1 finger width, maybe, something like that. So I'm going to do it again, make another sinus and a curve. The whole thing is curvy. Curvy sinus, curvy lobe, and then I'll bring it to the tip. And that is a really nice lobey leaf shape. I'm going to try to match it on the other side. So I'm going to do a small sinus and a small lobe. Then I'm going to do a little bigger sinus back to the edge of my balloon. And then an even bigger sinus, try to match my other one on the other side. I want them to be kind of similar. Then I'm going to make a bigger sinus, back out to my lobe. And I'm going to keep doing that, in and out, until I get to the bottom again. It's a really nice looking leaf. And once I get to the bottom, I'm going to draw my little stem. Skinny little stem. And there we go. I have now drawn a red oak leaf, nice and pointy, and a white oak leaf, nice and rounded. Now that I'm done with my balloon, I can go and erase my outer balloon shape, and all I will have left is my really nice leaf. There we go. We have our pointy red oak leaf and our rounded white oak leaf. They look pretty good. How do your leaves look? I hope they look awesome. I can't wait to see them when you're all done. Now I only have a couple more leaves I want to show you, and then when we're all finished, we're going to make a fall leaf wreath or background with them. And I'll let you do that part on your own, but I'm going to show you the rest of these leaves. I'm just going to flip this over to the other side, and we're going to move on to 2 more really beautiful fall leaves. One of them is kind of complicated. It's even more complicated, in my personal opinion, than the oak leaves, and that is a maple leaf. I'm going to put it right here. A maple leaf. You might have seen the picture of a maple leaf before because it's the leaf that they use for the Canadian flag. So here's an example of a nice maple leaf. Remember how I was talking about the palmate structure of a leaf? How you've got the palm in the middle and all the veins or fingers stem out from that main central point. That is the type of leaf that we have for the maple leaf. Can you see how we have not just one central vein, but 2, 3, 4, 5 central veins, and they all connect to a point at the bottom. That is our palmate leaf. So when we do our maple leaf over here, we're going to start with our veins again in the same way. We have one vein that goes up and down from top to bottom, and this is about as wide as my hand, maybe 4 fingers. I'm going to do my hand. So you can make your line about as big as your hand if you'd like to, or 4 fingers is fine too. Then I notice here, these 2 little ones almost run perpendicular to our vertical line. Vertical means up and down, horizontal means side to side, perpendicular means it makes like a perfect T shape. So we have a vertical line connecting to a horizontal line. That makes a perpendicular shape. And on this leaf, our 2 side veins are perpendicular to our primary vein right in the middle. They're not a perfect line, but they're pretty close. So I'm going to go down to the base of this leaf, and I'm going to draw 2 lines, one on each side. You might want to make sure you have enough room on the side of your paper. Now, these side lines are not as big as the tall line. If I measure this, that's about 3 fingers, and this one's about 4, almost 5 fingers. So I want to make sure that these side lines are not as tall as my up and down line. My up and down line needs to be bigger. And I also want you to look at the shape here. If I were to trace around this, touching all the tips, it actually makes a nice big circle, a nice round circle with kind of a flat bottom. Another way to figure out what the shape is, it could be to connect the points. There are 5 points on this one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then the base. Oh wait, there are actually more than I thought, because I forgot these little ones. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the inside. So if I take that off, that's an interesting shape. It's kind of like a lily pad, right? Or if I just connected these here, I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sides. It is not quite an octagon, and it is bigger than a hexagon. A septagon? But at any rate, the base is way down here, and the rest of this is just a big full leaf. So I'm going to come back and look at my leaf again, and try to figure out where my next lines are going to be. Now, if you're really good at math, you might be able to figure out the angle of this leaf. When you have a vertical line that is perpendicular to a horizontal line, you have a 90-degree angle. It's also called a right angle, and it is basically like a perfect square edge, or a perfect L, or a perfect T. When you try to divide that exactly in the middle, you get a 45-degree angle. So what we're trying to do is divide this angle from here to here exactly in half, so that we have the same amount of space on this side that we have on that side. So do your best to try to divide that in half and draw a line at about a 45-degree angle. And remember, we want this to be nice and rounded, just like this shape. So if you need to draw a nice big circle connecting your points together, that's okay. If that helps you get a nice round shape. Then you're going to come to the other side, try to get it so you have the same amount of space on each side of the line, and try to get your 45-degree angle, and draw your vein all the way to the edge of your circle. Really, we just have a half circle at this point. So now that we have our half circle with our 5 main veins, we're going to go and add the little points like we did with our red oak leaf. So as you can see, this point has 2 baby points on each side, and then 2 more baby points on the side of that before it makes a sinus. Same here, 2 baby points and 2 kind of bigger points. So I'm going to come to my leaf and I'm going to make 2 baby points on each side. They need to come shorter than the edge of the circle. So my big veins are touching the edge of my circle, but my baby points, I don't want them to touch my circle. They need to be smaller or shorter. So I'm going to make baby points on all of my 3 main stems. Let's just do the 3 main stems for now. And then I'm going to make 2 slightly bigger ones. So the shape I should get here is kind of like an invisible triangle, if you can see that. So then I'm going to come and follow the shape of this triangle and make 2 more slightly bigger points. I'm going to draw triangles on each of these very lightly because I'm going to erase these triangles. I don't want them to stay forever. But I'm going to follow the edge of that triangle and make my next 2 points so that they're slightly bigger. And I'm going to do the same thing on this side. See how my first 2 points kind of touch the inside edge of my little triangle? Now I want these 2 to touch it as well. Now before I move on to these bottom ones, they are a little bit different than the top ones. If I come to the bottom point, this one doesn't have a baby point. This one does have a baby point. So you can choose if you want both of them to have a baby point or not. But I'm going to do my triangle. And I'm going to go ahead and do 2 baby points on this one. Nah, I'm just going to do 1 baby point on this one. So it goes to my triangle. But then, after those 2 baby points, we have 1, 2, that's a bigger point, and then a small one. 1, and then a big one, and then a small one. So I need to draw some veins to these big ones here. These ones kind of go opposite from these long ones. And they are going to be the bottom part of our circle that's kind of squished. This bottom part, it's more like a half moon shape, so it's not nearly as big as the rest of my circle. So I'm going to lightly draw in a little half circle so I don't go too far. Then I'm going to go to my point, and I'm going to make a small point opposite this line. I even curved mine just a little so it's not perfectly straight. I'm going to do it this way too. I'm going to follow this line and go the opposite direction and make a little point that goes to the small part of my circle. See how this part of my circle is really big? If I were to measure this part of my circle and bring it down here, this little circle should be much, much smaller. If I measure my little circle, it can fit in my big circle 1, 2, 3 times. So this small half is only 1/3. 1, 2, 3. It's only 1 out of 3. 1/3 the size of this half. We're doing a lot of math today, aren't we? So after I do my points down here, remember I went opposite of this line, made a little point to that small portion of my circle, opposite of this line, and made a little point here. That's going to be my little point right there. Now, I have a point on this side and a small point on this side. So in order to make those, I'm going to add a teeny point right here, just a little one poking out on both sides. And then I've got this middle point right here that does come all the way to my circle. So I'm going to draw his line all the way from this vein here. I'm going to go all the way to the circle, and I'm kind of doing it right in between the other two. I'm going to do it on this side too. I go right from the middle of my vein all the way out to my circle, or at least almost out to my circle, right in the middle of those two. This is a really good start for my leaf skeleton. So what I'm going to do now is start connecting all of my little veins together. And I'm going to start with the tip top. Remember when we did the oak tree how we made U shapes? we're going to do the same thing. I'm going to go to my tip point and make a U shape to connect it to the other point, like you're making the bottom of an umbrella. And this side too. Then I'm going to make another U shape to connect it to the next point, and another U shape to connect it to the next point. I'm going to go around and do that to all my points. U shape to connect all of my lines together. Do you remember what it's called when the leaf has a point that pokes out? Like this? It's called a lobe. Do you remember what it's called when it curves in like this? A sinus. So right now, we are making the lobes of our leaves. I'm going to go to this point, curve it to the next one, curve it to the next one, back to the top. I'm going to let you guys go ahead and connect those curves together, so you should have 3 of them. Then I'm going to go to this bottom one, curve it to here, curve it to here, and I'm going to go ahead and connect it to these other 2 points down at the bottom. Curve it to here, curve it to here. Same with this side. Curve it to each little point of the veins. I'm even going to curve this one to my little one that's halfway, only half as big. Doop. I'll curve this one to my one that's half as big. There we go, the bottom's practically done. I only have 2 small steps left. Now that I have each of my lobes complete, all I have to do is connect them with a nice big sinus. Not quite all the way to the middle. So I'm going to go to one corner, make a big U shape, connect it to the next one. Same with over here. Big U shape, connect it to the next one. Ooh, it's starting to look like a maple leaf. A big sinus here, connect it to the next lobe. And a big sinus here, connect it to the next lobe. I decided to add a baby one after all. So this is the main shape of our maple leaf. What you can do now is add a few more secondary veins coming off the edges onto your leaf. They even go all the way to the sinuses. This part doesn't have to be perfect. You're just drawing some of the veins. And then when you're all finished, don't forget to give him a stem or a petiole at the bottom. And then go ahead and erase your big circle. And your little triangles. We don't need those anymore. Now go ahead and take a big look at your leaf. If anything seems funny to you, now is the time to fix it. For example, my leaf on this side doesn't quite point out as much as I'd like it to. So I could make it poke out a little more if I wanted to. There are little changes you could make if you would like. But if you're happy with your leaf the way it is, then we'll go ahead and move on to our last leaf. And by the way, notice how pointy each of these are. I don't even think I made mine pointy enough, so if I wanted to, I could go back and make them even pointier. And that might make it feel more like a nice pointy maple leaf. Even if I just extend these little tips a little farther, that already helps a lot. Because our maple leaves have nice pointy tips. Point, point. Wow, that already made a nice big difference. So if you want to go in and make your points a little pointier, go right ahead. But if you're happy with it the way it is, that is okay too. So I'm going to move this maple leaf out of the way, I'm also going to erase this really quick. Now the last leaves we're going to do are very little. One of these is a little aspen leaf. This one I actually got from my garden. It's drying up. And then we're also going to do a birch leaf. They're kind of similar, but they're a lot easier than the last leaves we did. Now an aspen leaf, if you've seen in the mountains, they're often called quaking aspens, and they have these little leaves and they kind of shimmer in the wind. They're so beautiful. They turn a beautiful golden color in the fall. What kind of shape do you see here? Remember, we drew shapes around all the other ones. The oak leaves looked like balloons. The maple leaves were like lopsided circles. The aspen leaf is kind of like a little circle shape. If I put that little aspen right here and trace around it, it is almost in the shape of a circle, though it's a little lopsided. But to make our aspen leaf, it actually makes it a lot easier knowing that it's almost a circle shape. I'm going to start by drawing a light circle. I'm going to be very careful to get it as round as possible. And then there are only a few very small changes you have to make for an aspen leaf. Notice the tip top of this aspen leaf, what's it doing? It has a little point right there. So in order to turn this circle into an aspen leaf, I'm going to carefully connect to my rounded edges and make a point on the top, just like my aspen leaf. Now the other thing I'm going to do is come here to the edge of my circle on the left side and the right side. I'm going to give it some nice wide hips. I'm basically going to widen my circle just a teeny bit on the right side and just a teeny bit on the left side. And then at the bottom, I'm going to bring it down to another little point, because that is where it connects to the petiole. Just like that. Now notice the veins on my aspen leaf. I do have one central midrib, and the other veins come off of the midrib. Do you remember what that's called? It's called pinit. Pinnate. So I'm going to lightly draw my midrib, and then I'm going to lightly draw my pinit veins coming off of the midrib. These ones kind of curve upward a little bit. And they even have little secondary veins off of them, or tertiary veins at this point. And then all I have to do is erase what's left of my circle, and that's it. I have an aspen leaf. The aspen leaf is probably one of the easiest leaves to draw. Now there's another leaf that's very similar to an aspen leaf, and that is a birch leaf. I don't actually have a picture of a birch leaf for you at the moment, but I'm still going to help you draw it right here next to the aspen. And I'll tell you this much, the shape of a birch leaf is kind of like a big triangle. So I want you to start by drawing a big triangle, but draw it very lightly because we're going to erase the triangle eventually. So now that I have my big triangle shape, when I have a birch leaf, it has a lot of little teeny tiny pricklies coming off of each of the veins. So first I'm going to draw my midrib down the middle, and I'm actually going to cross the middle a little bit further. Then I'm going to go back to my midrib all the way at the bottom, and I'm going to draw pinnate veins coming off of each side till they get close to my triangle. So I'm going to draw one here at a diagonal. I'm going to go to the bottom and draw one here at a diagonal, and I'm going to keep drawing pinnate diagonal veins from my midrib, my central vein. It looks kind of like an arrowhead right now, but it will look more like a leaf when we're done. Now, even though we've drawn this triangle, the real shape of a birch leaf is a little rounder. So it has a nice long tip at the top, but as it comes down the side, it gets rounder, rounder, and then it kind of flattens out towards the bottom a little bit. I might have made my bottom even too round. Flatten it a little more. But this is kind of the shape of the birch leaf. So now these little veins actually need to go all the way to that roundish bubble. It kind of looks like a raindrop if you think about it. Now once each of my veins touches the edge of my raindrop, it's going to make a point and have kind of like a toothy edge to it. So each of these veins is going to be a main point, and it's going to have little points in between each of them. So on each point, I'm going to curve it like this, curve, and make a point, make a point. And I kind of want my points to be almost pointed towards the tip top a little bit. I don't need any points on the bottom, but at the edge of my triangle, point, point. I'm doing that same U shape that I did on the maples when I went from one point to the other. It's got this little U shape and these little points from one vein to the next until it gets to the end. Now in between each of those points there are littler points, so there are even more little wiggles on this birch leaf, but that's a lot of details and it might be kind of hard to do. So for now, what I want you to do is erase your triangle. You might have to fix your lines a little bit. We don't need our triangle anymore. You can go back in and fix your little veins if you'd like. And then you can give it a petiole or a stem. I've been giving them a little wider circle at the bottom because that's the part where it connects to the twig. But this is the basic idea of how you can do a birch leaf. And there is only one last leaf I want to show you before we're done today. I'm just going to scoot this paper over. Now this leaf is a little bit different. It is called a hickory leaf. Also, people sometimes call this a walnut leaf. Now the reason I want to show you this hickory or walnut leaf is because it is a compound leaf. Remember we talked about simple leaves and compound leaves? This leaf is a compound leaf. And it does have a very similar shape to this one that we already drew. So it shouldn't be too complicated. I'm going to start with a horizontal line. I'm going to leave some space on the edge here because I'm going to put a leaf there. And I'm going to leave some space around here. Then all I really have to do is make some almond-shaped leaves. They're kind of like the birch leaf, but a little more rounded and pointed at the bottom. So here's an example. I'm going to go to the end of this point, and I'm going to make a nice rounded ovalish shape with a point at the end. This is the typical leaf that you always see. And then all I need to do to make this a compound leaf is go down a little bit and make a little mark here where the leaves connect. Go a little further and make another little mark. Go a little further and make one more little mark. This is where my leaves are going to connect on each side. Now, the larger shape of this is similar to the shape of the leaf itself. It's a big, wide leaf shape, if you think about it. So if I make a giant leaf shape around this, then all of my leaflets, or little leaves, should be able to reach the edge of this giant leaf shape and fit within that shape. So I'm going to come here and draw a leaflet. If it's easier to draw the stem first, go right ahead. Sorry, I meant to say the midrib. If it's easier to draw the midrib first, go right ahead. In fact, I'm actually just going to draw a giant leaf. So it's kind of like I drew a giant leaf and I drew the midrib and I drew the secondary veins off the sides. Remember the pinit, because they all touch the central vein. And then I'm going to turn each of these veins into a smaller leaf. It sounds kind of crazy, but this is a really easy way to draw a compound leaf. So now I'm going to come back to the base, and I'm going to go kind of wide circle with a point at the end. Wide half circle with a point at the end. I'm going to do that for every single one, and I want it to go all the way to the edge of my leaf shape. And they get smaller and smaller as they get further along the leaf shape. Which is why this is such a great shape to start with, because it helps us have a really nice form for our compound leaf. So I'm going back to the base, a nice wide half circle at the bottom with a long point at the top. Wide at the bottom, long and pointy at the top. Last one down here. And that's it for my compound leaf, although this one needs a little bit of a midrib, doesn't it? And then I can draw my little stem at the bottom, my petiole. So this is a hickory leaf, right over here. Or some people like to call it a walnut, from a walnut tree. Interestingly enough, each of these different trees produces a different type of seed, and those seeds are things that we recognize. The hickory tree produces walnut seeds. The oak leaves create acorn seeds. I don't know if you knew this or not, but every little acorn is a baby tree. A baby tree seed. So these two trees produce acorns. Hickory trees produce walnuts, kind of like what Thumbelina slept in. Maple trees produce some of my favorite seeds. I call them helicopter seeds. You have a stem, and then on each side of the stem is the little seed, one on each side, and then each seed is connected to a large helicopter-like wing. And they grow in little pods. So they're all kind of connected to each other. I don't know if you've seen these before, but when you drop one of these from the air, they go spinning down like a helicopter, and it's one of my most favorite things. But they grow in little clusters like this. So that's the kind of seed pod that a maple tree makes. Aspen and birch trees make very different types of seed pods. A birch seed pod, you might have seen it before. It actually looks kind of like a little worm, but it's definitely not a little worm. They grow in little clusters like this. And they look kind of like baby pine cones. They have like little flaky circular leaves that go all the way around them. And when you break them apart in your fingers, they feel kind of cool. So these are how the seed pods for birch trees look. And aspen tree seed pods are kind of similar, but instead of being little teeny paper leaves, they're more like fluffy little pods. So the aspen seed pod, it's still kind of like that worm shape, but it's a little more fluffy, almost like little baby petals, but they kind of turn cottony. So they look a little more like this. If you've seen any aspen or birch trees around, you'll know what I'm talking about. So now you know how to make a bunch of different types of leaves. Aspen, circular aspen leaves with pinnet veins. This is a simple leaf. Birch ones that are kind of triangular, more like a raindrop, with also pinnet veins and little serrated edges, jaggedy teeth edges. You know how to make a hickory or walnut leaf shape. We don't really need these lines anymore. You know how to make a hickory or walnut shape. A compound leaf. Remember, a compound leaf just has one bud at the very end of it. And these are all little leaflets. You know how to make a maple leaf with its really cool helicopter type seed pods. You know how to make a white oak leaf and a red oak leaf, and they both produce cute little acorn seeds. We have learned a lot of different types of leaves today. Now, the next thing I want you to do, if you still have the energy for more leaves, is take all these different types of leaves and create a beautiful leaf background. You can either create a border of leaves and then draw something in the middle, or color them and glue them to a picture, or you could completely fill your background with leaves that are overlapping. I'm going to do a quick example right now, and I'll play it in fast motion so you can see how it looks. I'm going to go ahead and draw a background with all of the different leaf shapes that we've created. Also, you can curve your leaves to fit around the border and just adapt them to the curve. So here's what I'm going to do. And there you have a beautiful fall leafy frame created out of leaves that you know how to draw by hand. If you want to learn how to draw some hand lettering, I have or will soon have another video with some tips on how to make some really beautiful hand lettering. In the meantime, I hope you loved making this beautiful fall frame and that you learned a lot about leaves. To me, they are just so beautiful and they are part of what makes fall so special. I hope you've loved this video. Please share your versions with me. There is a link in the comments where you can go to my website and share your images there. I would love to see the creations you've made. Also, go ahead and color your beautiful fall scene. It's not fall without bright, vibrant colors. Thanks so much again for watching. I've loved creating with you, and I hope you'll join me again for the next project. Bye!